Welcome everyone to the TBARTA November board meeting. We're at PSTA headquarters. Janet, will you lead us in the pledge, please?
Thank you. Please rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Sue, will you call the roll, please?
Chair Jim Holton.
Present.
Melanie Griffin.
Here.
Cliff Manuel. Mike Millett.
Present.
Commissioner John Mitten. Commissioner Mitten is unable to join us and sends his regrets. Commissioner Pat Kemp. Commissioner Betsy Benak. On a phone. Commissioner Catherine Starkey.
Here.
Commissioner Karen Steele. Here. Kathleen Shanahan.
Here.
Commissioner Janet Long.
Here.
Mayor Rick Kreisman.
Here.
Mayor Bob Buckhorn sends his regrets he's unable to join us. Secretary David Gwen.
Here.
Secretary Bob K. Manjan.
Here.
You have a physical quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Sue. Will you read the public service announcement?
Persons wishing to address the board are requested to complete a comment card and give it to staff. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes. The public comment period can be extended for up to 30 minutes.
Thank you, and again, remind you, anyone who has not submitted a public comment card and wishes to do so, please do so at this time. And we will hold another public comment session prior to taking votes on important items today as well. So with that said, the chair recognizes Daryl Henderson.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Daryl Henderson, Clearwater Regional Chamber of Commerce. Wanted to quickly express our support and our gratitude to Scott Pringle and his team for putting together the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan and moving it forward. And they've done a great job. And we in Clearwater understand that the Catalyst project will not directly affect us immediately, but we also understand that this is a long-term project to fix a long-term concern for the Tampa Bay region, and we support that as long as we keep in mind that in Clearwater we have the #1 beach in the United States, and tourism is a major revenue driver here in Pinellas County and in Clearwater as well. And so we would remind you to keep in mind the Tampa International Airport to Clearwater Beach part of the plan. The other thing I would like to mention is that on Friday, November 30th, we are holding our second annual Attitudes of Gratitude breakfast hosted by the Clearwater Regional Chamber. I had flyers put in front of each of you, I believe, this morning. That will be held Friday, November 30th, 7:30 a.m. I believe it's at the Sand Pearl Resort on Clearwater Beach, and each of you is invited. Ticket is $35, but for $60 you can purchase a ticket for yourself and one of the first responders. We started this last year following Hurricane Irma, and we will continue that this year, particularly expressing our gratitude to the Parks and Rec Department and Solid Waste for the City of Clearwater. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, Chair recognizes Morgan Holmes.
Chairman Holton, members of the board, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak this morning regarding the regional BRT project. My name is Morgan Holmes, and I'm Director of the Office of Corporate Partnerships at the University of South Florida. On behalf of USF, I would like to offer comments in support of the regional BRT project and ask the board to move it into project development. A significant number of USF students, faculty, and staff travel the region each day to access the university's 3 campuses and additional facilities. The anticipated growth of the region and new facilities, such as the USF Health Morsani College of Medicine and Heart Institute downtown, only enhance the need for regional connectivity. USF is a major activity center and economic driver for the region, and advancing the BRT project would allow us to connect with each other more effectively and enhance our collective impact. This project is of vital importance to our community, and again, we ask the board to support the regional BRT project and move it into project development. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, the chair recognizes Eddie Birch.
Good morning. I'm Eddie Burge, Tampa Innovation Partnership. We are a 230-member plus organization of individuals, businesses, and nonprofits in the Uptown Tampa region surrounding USF, North Tampa, Temple Terrace, and unincorporated Hillsborough County. One of the common concerns voiced by our members and the innovators that we work to attract to this district is transportation. We need efficient connections to downtown Tampa, West Shore, the airport, Gateway, and Pasco County. We've seen numerous examples of BRT serving as a catalyst to innovation districts and other metro areas around the nation. So the Tampa Innovation Partnership supports BRT and encourages you to move forward with the plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, the chair recognizes Diane Jacob.
Good morning. I'm Diane Jacob, and I'm with PNC Bank. I'm here today on behalf of our regional president, Chad Lohr, who serves as the chair of the Transportation Working Group at the Tampa Bay Partnership. I'm sorry, he's sorry he's not able to be here today to join us, but has provided me with the following statement, which I'd like to read. Tampa Bay is the 18th largest metro area in the country, and more than 850,000 new residents are expected to move here by 2040. Our transportation challenges are going to become significantly worse if we don't start addressing the issue now. This is much more than a transportation issue. It's an economic development issue. Employers need to access workers throughout the entire Tampa Bay region, and those workers should have the ability to access jobs beyond their county lines. We've got to figure out this if we were going to continue to grow and compete. Hillsborough County has already taken a huge leap forward with the passage of the transportation referendum, and we're well on our way to strengthening the super region with Brightline's plans to add service between Tampa and Orlando. Now it's time to focus on connecting Tampa Bay. With the Regional Transportation Feasibility Plan, we have a vision for a regional transit system and a recommended catalyst project that includes Pinellas, Hillsborough, and Pasco counties. We want to set the bar as high as possible for this regional bus rapid transit project that includes a dedicated transit right-of-way along the full 41-mile route. Modern community-based stations that trigger smart transit-oriented development, and a high level of frequency that encourages strong ridership. We have the time to figure out all of these details in the project development stage. Right now, the most important thing is to keep the project moving forward. That is why I'm asking you today to support this Catalyst BRT project and help us finally implement a transit project that connects our region and provides our residents with greater access to jobs and economic opportunity. Thank you all.
Thank you. Next, Stephen Bernstein.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to address you this morning. My name is Steve Bernstein, and I'm the chair of the Greater Tampa Chamber of Commerce. And on behalf of our 1,300 business members, we're here today to urge you to register our support for the regional BRT project and ask that the board move forward with that project and get it into project development. Our 1,300 members as businesses employ workers that cross the bay and work on a regional basis every hour of every day in this region of ours, and truly we're looking for a portion of a regional solution. I think all of us know that the Tampa Bay region is expected to experience significant population growth over the coming years, and I think we also understand that if we're going to sustain that population growth, we need to connect the entire region. We see this Catalyst project as a key portion of a broader solution in that regard. Our citizens already recognize this, and we're confident that that's a key reason why they voted for the AFT referendum in Hillsborough by the overwhelming margin that they did. I think we all understand that our businesses need access to workers, and our workers need access to jobs. With the success of the referendum in Hillsborough, we see this as a logical next step and really a missing link towards a truly regional solution. We're optimistic that at some point we'll have a Bright Line plan to link Tampa and Orlando by rail, but once they come to Tampa, we have to find a way to move them around, and hopefully once they leave Tampa, we have to find a way to get them here, and I think you all understand that the feeling's mutual coming from the other side. I speak with my counterparts at the St. Pete Chamber all the time, and I hear the same thing from them. I would just close by saying this. We've long since moved beyond the notion that any one solution is going to be a ticket to a broader way to resolve these challenges. We got here over a long period of time, and it's going to take a broad array of options to get us out of the situation we're in. 30 years ago, our greatest regional challenge was transportation. A key piece of that solution is now within our grasp, and every year our chamber benchmarks other cities, and every year we come away with a lesson, and that lesson is that BRT is a logical step forward toward an effective regional transit system. It's the right start for our city, it's the right start for our county, but more importantly, it is the right start for our region. And we have a lot of optimism on our side of the bay that when combined with the resources that we're soon to see deployed by virtue of the AFT referendum and in conjunction with some of the other wonderful things that we know are coming to our region, this can be truly a catalyst, not just in name, but in action. And for all those reasons, we would urge you to move this project forward. Thank you.
Next, the chair recognizes Michael Marino.
Good afternoon, Board. My name is Michael Marino. I'm the Director of Transportation and Planning for the West Shore Alliance. On behalf of the Alliance, we ask you to support the resolution to accept and approve the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan and proceeds with the PD&E phase of the project. There are 97,000 people who work in West Shore every day, and as members of this Board, you represent all of them. About half the people who work in West Shore are commuting from the Hillsborough suburbs. A third are coming from outside of Hillsborough County, 22% of which are coming from Pinellas, 9% of which are coming from Pasco County. These are the people who will benefit from this plan moving forward. Most of the employees in West Shore take at least a half hour to get to work every day. So a half hour there, half hour back. It's an hour in the car every day, 5 hours a week, 20 hours a month. There needs to be an option for them in the future that they don't have to be in their car every day to get to work. The survey that gave us this information also told us that only 1% of commuters into West Shore are taking transit on a daily basis. But 60% said that transit currently is completely unsatisfactory for the West Shore region. The demand is there, but the services are not. We hope that you give them the transit they deserve and advance this plan forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, the chair recognizes Chris Steinaker.
Steiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the board. My name is Chris Steinacher. I'm President and CEO of the St. Petersburg Area Chamber of Commerce. I am the CEO of the St. Petersburg EDC and the President and CEO of the St. Petersburg Area Chamber of Commerce's Grow Smarter strategy, where we have 80 organizations working together for the future of our community. We too are in support of the moving the feasibility plan forward, and we support the regional BRT plan. You know, many people, we say in St. Pete, every good conversation starts with or ends with, I love St. Pete. We're passionate. As when we talk about Tampa Bay, we're not as passionate right now. And it's not because we don't love every part of the communities we want to get to. It's just we're stuck. We can't get there. And we're tired of that. We need to get to the world's best airport. We need to get to, and we need to get to that wonderful downtown and the arena. And more importantly, as our community considers consolidation of our universities, now we're going to be asking our students to go back and forth from St. Pete to Tampa. We don't have a solution for them, but we have a mandate to consolidate. We hope and work, we're looking forward to working with you all. But I just want to put something in your mind. You know, we've been talking, I've heard Brightline mentioned a few times. Brightline also came to our chamber, and because we're supportive and we were interested in should they be bringing it over the bridge. And they said, well, that may not be the plan, but we're hopeful that something like that would happen. But the thing that struck all of us at our board was the reality is that by 2024, the Brightline train will stop in downtown Tampa. 2024, less than 6 years away. So let's imagine when those folks come off that train with their Mickey ears and their Miami money, and they're looking around and going, okay, now how do I get to the beach? How do I get to one of the best downtowns in the world? How can I spend more money in our region? We don't have that solution. That's 6 years away. If we start today, we may not make it till 2024 to get there. So you must start today by moving this forward, or we're basically missing another golden opportunity that we've lost for the last 30 years. We ask for your support, and I'm so proud of all the chambers in our regional partnership that brought us all together, and we ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to make public comment? Okay, none being heard, I will declare public comment closed. Next item of business is the consent agenda, which is the prior board meetings. Are there any revisions or modifications to that?
Move consent.
Second. None being motion, consent. Any objections to the motion to approve the minutes? Anyone on the telephone? Any objections? None being heard, motion approved. Next, we turn to item 5, which is the...
Chair, you need to take a vote.
Well, I asked if there was no objections, and she didn't do that. Do I need to take a roll?
You can take a voice vote, but you should just take a voice.
Okay, all right. On those consents, those things are differently handled in different respects. But anyway, all in favor of approval of the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, council.
Thank you.
Next item is item number 5, policy committee reports. Now, is Melanie or Cliff going to give that report?
I'll provide it.
Okay, thank you. Chair recognizes Cliff Manuel.
We did not have a quorum, so the discussion we're going to have is by consensus. I was vice chair and I was filling in for Melanie, who was not there that day, which is why I'm giving the report. By consensus, we wanted Melanie to stay chair because we had a discussion of election of officers, and by consensus, I would be vice chair. That would need to be ratified. It was not voted on. The other more detailed discussion we had was related to the moving forward with the feasibility plan's recommendations to start the PD&E analysis for the next step in the much-awaited corridor studies that we're doing for transit along our fixed lanes and consistent with our feasibility report. Again, we didn't have a quorum, so by consensus, we recommend to the board that we move to the PD&E analysis. There was some discussion by one of our board members, Commissioner Kemp, of some of the concerns that she may have related to that consensus opinion. I'd like to recognize her for any follow-up comments she may have.
Well, clearly it wasn't by consensus, because I did object. It's not even just specifics. I am opposed. And I'll get into that after we see this regional parking garage plan presented. You know, I'll save my criticisms for that.
Okay, thank you.
And that's acknowledged. That's consistent with what happened at the meeting, and she did represent some concerns, and I would encourage her to relate those to the board.
Okay, is there a report on emerging transportation technologies and a recommendation on that?
I don't think we've reached consensus on that discussion, did we?
Well, if I may, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you. We had a fairly lengthy discussion about the language that we were being asked to vote on. And my understanding was that we approved the idea, but we wanted to expand it so that we were not setting a precedent on one particular form of technology, given that technology is moving so rapidly and we do not yet know what will come down the pike. And we were, Caesar, who is in the audience, gracefully indicated that he would be happy to expand the resolution so that we were in a better posture and position to move it forward. That's what I remember.
Which would be transit by broad nature and not a specific discussion related to Hyperloop.
Right, and I think that's corrected here in our
Right.
Yes, it's been corrected.
And with that change, we did reach consensus that we'd move forward with the understanding of continuing our analysis as a transit alternatives versus Hyperloop alternative.
And we have, is the committee prepared to recommend a motion to be adopted by the board and a resolution in support of moving forward with emerging technologies?
Yes.
I think the committee's in a position to make a recommendation of both the feasibility analysis and the Hyperloop.
And the vice chair.
And the vice chair and the chair positions as well. And with the committee here, we could follow through with those. We did not have a quorum in our policy committee meetings, so we'd have to ratify it by board vote.
All right,
On
well,
all those issues.
We had a quorum in participation, but we didn't have a quorum in person.
okay, well, let me defer to council. Should we have that in a separate committee meeting to make that vote as
Yeah, the
opposed?
committee has to appoint their chair
Right.
and vice chair, so they'll have to do it at the next meeting of the policy.
Or if they want to
Can we do it right after?
stay after this?
No, we didn't notice a meeting for the policy committee today.
Okay.
We can do that on the 7th.
Do that on the 7th then, the election of officers. But there is a resolution now that someone can make a recommendation
Yes.
to support the resolution here, and we can have discussion on that.
Both the RTFP and the emerging technologies resolutions.
Right, right.
Would someone like to present that, Melanie or Cliff?
I'll do it again.
Or Commissioner Long.
Mr. Chair.
But, so which one are we taking first? Emergency
Technologies.
Okay, so what we're recommending is that the word Hyperloop, which was in our policy committee discussion, be changed to transit so that we look at a broad spectrum of emerging technologies that might relate to that type of transit system or any other that would become feasible or be considered feasible.
Well, I believe the appropriate language should be transit technologies.
Transit technologies, correct.
Okay, and staff has prepared a motion to that effect, or a resolution to that effect, correct?
Correct, yes, staff has prepared a resolution. Currently, it reads emerging transportation technologies, but I would defer to legal to read through it so that the board can hear the full language and make a recommendation.
The policy committee definitely discussed transit versus transportation.
Yeah.
So we can make that change.
We can change.
It's a simple change.
I'm just trying to see if there's anything else that needs to be changed. I mean, transportation is used throughout. If you want, we can switch that to transit.
Can you explain me the nuances of the differences of saying transit or transportation? Is it more, yeah, I don't want to leave out any technologies.
Well, transportation would include everything from a single lane roadway to any other type of transportation design consideration. Transit sort of moves it toward moving a lot of people at one time versus transportation, which could be a single car consideration. So I think transit versus transportation does have a difference in what you perceive that your technology is attempting to do, which is move a lot of people in a transit system versus a single car type application, which could be transportation.
I think if you think about technologies, probably the biggest difference would be a car for single purpose use that is an automated vehicle would not be considered transit, whereas a automated vehicle that was a bus or multi-person vehicle would be considered transit.
Because there's some technologies that
would be the,
we haven't discussed here that I want to make sure we're not precluding.
Right.
And so I'm more comfortable now.
My understanding from the report was that, and I was not attending the policy committee meeting at that time, my understanding was this is to be as broad as possible in supporting emerging technologies in general, including obvious transit and then other modes of technologies, modes of transportation as well. Is that not the case?
Correct.
That's the case.
But if the board want to consider single car technologies as part of the recommendations, that transportation be more appropriate than transit. But we were definitely discussing transit as a.
Yeah. And I would agree with that. The policy committee discussed transit. Their main focus was that we didn't want to limit it to the Hyperloop technology.
Right, right.
Commissioner Kim.
Now, I'd like to be clear that this board is supposed to be discussing transit, and that's supposed to be their charge, not single occupancy vehicle, which is why I have objections also to the regional parking garage plan. It's not really a transit plan. So I would be very clearly opposed to anything to do with single occupancy vehicle or zero occupancy vehicles in terms of the automated vehicles.
Yeah, well, it's my understanding automated vehicles on demand can pick up multiple people, so there is somewhat of an overlap, technically speaking, in those regards. And I don't personally see the objections to supporting emerging technologies as a general proposition overall, but again, it's the Policies Committee's recommendation, so.
I'm fine to move forward with it as transit, and, I mean, this is just a resolution for support. It's not
Yes, it's not.
voting on anything, so it's not the end of the line here today on this.
Yes, would,
I would make that motion then if
Second.
it's appropriate.
a motion, a second, any further discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Chair, a point of order, please, if I may. I would like clarification on several times today, this morning, and during our policy committee, I have heard the phrase parking garage. And I would really like to know where that is coming from. As a board, I think we need to clarify that, because I am not familiar with the 41-mile feasibility plan being referred to as a parking garage, and I would hate for our citizens or anyone else beaming into our meeting today to misunderstand exactly what we're talking about. So is it appropriate to ask Scott to just clarify that language so that we're all on the same page here? I think it's important.
All right, Chair recognizes Scott Pringle to address that issue.
Good morning, Board. Scott Pringle from WSP. I believe the question coming from the Commissioner regarding the parking, and we've had this conversation a few times, during the feasibility plan, the sort of industry best practice for looking at stations and how much parking you provide along the entire corridor is to make sure there's enough parking spaces to serve the ridership that we're expecting on a daily basis. Now, this is a very conservative approach. It's not always the case. You don't necessarily need that much parking for the ridership, but where we stand in the process, it is the industry best standard. And we looked at having about 8,000 parking spots. They are not assigned to any one particular station across the entire line. It's assumed that it's required by the entire system. The expectation would be that you're most likely going to have more parking needs in places like Wesley Chapel, where there'll be a lot of folks that will be driving to a station to use the service, or even the Gateway area. But absolutely, especially something like this, the parking is absolutely something we would evaluate during the PD&E process and can be refined. It's a conservative approach. It's our methodology that we applied across all alternatives.
Thank you so much.
Is that responsive to your question?
It is, and I see that Commissioner Kemp has her hand raised, and so my question was not to get into a back and forth about interpretation. I do believe Mr. Scott is the expert on the issue, which is why I asked him to speak.
I am a board member, and I would like to speak to it.
Yeah, I'm going to recognize Commissioner Kemp to respond.
I do think it's a deceit on the public to call this a regional transit feasibility plan. We can get into that more after you make your presentation. $430 million are being spent on parking garages. 9,000 spaces, up to 9,000 spaces for moving 330 people an hour. The predominance of this plan is a parking garage plan. They call multimodal centers. It's not for multi-modes. There's not multi-modes involved. So I think it's really, I will not deceive people as an elected official, the only one from Hillsborough County here, by the way, by calling this a regional transit feasibility plan. It's not. It's a regional parking garage plan. That's what the investment is in. That's what it's doing. It's not really moving people. So it's a policy disagreement. It's factual in here. 430 million of this 455 million is parking garages. And I think we should be honest with the public about what this is and not deceive them and call it a transit plan.
Well, the document speaks for itself somewhat, and the public can make their own judgments about that, as can this board. And I would prefer not to get into a lengthy political argument at this juncture, but that being said, I recognize Melanie for a comment.
This may be a point for our council. I don't know if he knows, and I don't know if this is an actual Robert's order, but the only thing I'd ask as the only gubernatorial appointee from Hillsborough County is that we use language that doesn't go beyond advocacy and is potentially disrespectful to our citizens. I think we can effectively state our thoughts here today without going beyond that.
Secretary Gwynn?
I just wanted real quick, and I've had discussions with Commissioner Kemp, and I understand some of her concerns, but I wanted us to take a step back for a second, because typically when a feasibility study is done, it doesn't go into as much detail as this feasibility study went into. Usually, the result of a feasibility study will be basically a route and a mode. You'll say, okay, it's going to be some kind of a rubber tire solution that's going to go from here to here. One of the big challenges that we ran into as we were trying to develop this plan was that we were not able to find the local funding that we felt could match a bigger project or a different type of project. In part, that's been changed since there's now a penny for, 45% of that will go to heart. So there's different opportunities emerging as we go through this study. The PD&E study is what's going to take us into the, if you want to call it, the more detailed analysis of what do we want to build. The station building, all that stuff could easily change. We've provided a $2.5 million grant to HART to study an arterial BRT that would go parallel to this system, at least in Hillsborough County, from downtown up to the USF. I could easily see where the section north of downtown, the regional system, becomes more something that would look more like an express bus system that would use lanes but would tie into the arterial BRT. And over time, all these systems start to come together. But I would just hope we don't get too fixated on what the feasibility shows in terms of stations and parking. That's all going to be completely washed free when the PD&E comes in and says, now we get to work on looking at what the details are. So the 8,000 parking lot, that's rule of thumb, pull it out of a, that doesn't mean that's what we're going to get at the end of the PD&E. So as you're looking at this, don't put too much credence in that the feasibility study results are going to be what we actually build. The hard work comes in now when the PD&E would go forward.
And I appreciate your comments, Secretary Gwen, as always. But I am an elected official in Hillsborough County, and there's an oh, sorry. I am an elected official in Hillsborough County. I worked on transit and worked hard on it, and I think that people voted there for taxes because they wanted them to actually move people and supply good transit. And this is, we're moving this forward, this thing, and what this thing has is $430 million in parking garages. That's what it is. It's a regional parking garage plan. And I'm not going to, color it over with different things about what it is. This is what was put forward. And I think it's important for people to understand that and to not have the illusion that this is a transit plan. I want to be honest with people that are looking at this, that have given their resources. In Hillsborough County, people are not supportive of this, this isn't what I see moving forward there. So, I would just want to be clear also. I think it's to not, people have been told all kinds of things, like they believe that this somehow pays for the lanes or whatever. We have $15 million in here for buses, 11 buses. We have $430 million for parking garages. We don't have to pay for the roads or anything in here. So I just think it should be clear to people, and I think it's everything but clear. We've called it a BRT, we've called it a transit plan when it's not. It's a regional parking garage plan, and I intend to address it that way because that's what the investment is. If that changes, maybe I'll look at it differently. But right now, it's a regional parking garage plan for what we're presenting and what obviously people are prepared to move forward.
Okay, Commissioner, we're getting kind of repetitive here, and we've kind of asked and answered the question, so I'm going to ask that we all move on now so we can get to the meats of this. And remind everyone, to buffer what Secretary Gwynn said, that the PD&E study will potentially change a lot of these dynamics and some of the actual figures, so I would urge everyone and the public watching to reserve judgment until they set the process work itself out and not jump to any kind of speedy conclusions now. So, and that's exactly what we are trying to do in an orderly and timely fashion today.
Mr. Chair, one other item from the Policy Committee. We did reach consensus on the Florida Retirement System Plan. Recommend to the board that we move forward with that. There was no objections on that discussion by the policy.
And Debbie is going to give us a brief summary of that.
Just wanted to give you the background from our discussion.
Okay, good. That being said, the chair will recognize Debbie Leos from PSTA to update us on that.
Thank you, Chair Holton. Yes, at the Policy Committee, we discussed bringing TBARTA into the Florida retirement system. That's a benefit that they have not had since their inception. We have included in the budget the ability to do this. With this program, with the Florida retirement system, the employees would contribute 3%, and TBARTA would contribute 8.26%. I think this is an excellent tool, not only as a benefit to current employees, but as an excellent recruiting tool as we start to look forward to bring more people into TBARTA at a higher level. We'll be able to look throughout the state and outside of the state to bring talent in. So the recommendation to the board is to approve application to the FRS for TBARTA. Are there any questions?
Questions for Debbie?
Move approval.
Second.
Been a motion, a second. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Debbie. Okay, anything else, Cliff, from the Policy Committee?
No, and I appreciate you allowing us the time to bring that to the board's attention.
Thank you, and thanks for that good report. We're next going to turn to the chairman's report, and as preliminary to me recognizing Scott Pringle to present the RTFP, I'd like to just remind everyone on April 27, 2018, this board approved the Memorandum of Understanding with the various stakeholders and partners in the RTP. The contract between Hart and Jacobs has concluded on October 6, and Scott will give us kind of an update and how that plan wrapped up and what all the input was on that. And Scott is now with WSP, as most of us know here. So as preliminary to that, the chair recognizes Scott Pringle.
Good morning again, TBARTA board. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come speak to you today. Excited to be here. This is a great milestone in the process. We've been working on this plan for over 2 years now. Really, first I'm going to walk you through a summary of how the plan has been developed to date, and then I'm going to really focus then on what are the next steps and some of those key questions that we need to evaluate during the PD&E. So to start off with, obviously, one of the key needs, and this is something that this board has talked about quite frequently, is that need for mobility. If we actually look at actual data from the last 5 years and look at how that impacts the next decade, we're easily going to see another 500,000 of folks moving to the Tampa Bay area. We've got 97 million vehicle miles traveled on our roadways, and over 25% of those vehicle miles traveled are actually on our regional roadways, which are the interstates and the expressways. We've also done an awful lot of planning in our area over the past 30 years. We've done well over 55 different planning studies to date. We've never received federal capital dollars from the Federal Transit Administration. We do have a great opportunity that stands before us now, PSTA advancing the Central Avenue BRT. If and when they do receive those federal funds, we'll be the first for our region. But more than that, sort of establishing why we even did the plan was the fact that we recognized the need to move beyond visioning. We've done an awful lot of planning, we've done an awful lot of visioning in the region, but let's move beyond that and start identifying projects that can be implemented here today in 2018. So the Secretary mentioned this, I'm just going to reiterate this very quickly. What is the expectation for a feasibility plan? It's a corridor, it's a mode, and certainly what we've accomplished through this past 2-year plan was we really have a great understanding of what some of the community concerns are and what are some of the design issues, and that'll go a really long way in streamlining that next step, that PD&E process. So the purpose of the regional plan, I have it stated here. This is actually the first paragraph of that HART scope of services, which dictated what the team's activities were over the last 2 years. And you can see the emphasis on regional transit, that vision, and identifying a catalyst. The goals for that catalyst, again, something that serves that regional vision, really the top performing project that competes well for federal and state grant dollars. And again, it's not the only solution, it's the first of many. And the idea is that this could be the first project to really get the ball rolling on implementing the rest of that regional vision. So one of our first steps, that first milestone, was the definition of that regional vision. You can see that here on your slide. There are over 20 projects identified in this vision, connecting all parts of the three-county area and beyond. Next step was taking that vision and identifying of that, what were the top performing corridors, and what we found is there are 5 top performing corridors. You can see them here, the 275 corridor, connections out to Brandon, South Tampa, as well as Clearwater. We also identified the Central Avenue BRT. Again, that's already in process. That's actually in design right now, so a really great opportunity for the region. And the USF to Tampa, USF area to Tampa corridor, the CSX corridor, we actually started off by looking at the entire line, which goes all the way up through Brooksville, but quickly recognized that at least in what we're looking at over the next 5-10 years, the highest performing portion of that corridor was that connection to the USF area to downtown Tampa. So moving through those 5 corridors, what we identified was 2 top projects.
Are you raising a point of order, or I prefer we hold questions until he's completed his...
Okay, then we'll go back.
Thanks.
So we identified 2 top performing projects. So our term project really is looking at those top 5 corridors, assigning a mode or a transit mode to each one of those corridors. And what we found was that a rubber tire solution, or BRT, on the I-275 corridor had its best performance out of all the other alternatives. Along the CSX corridor, which connects the greater USF area to downtown Tampa, we found that an urban rail type of service really was the best performing. However, we were actually looking at light rail on that CSX corridor, double tracking it and all the different infrastructure requirements for light rail. And we also looked at a BRT in its own separated transit way along the entire length of the 275 corridor. And what we immediately found was neither one of these projects were meeting the FTA criteria for cost effectiveness. They request that a project is at least $10 per trip or better annually, and we weren't meeting that criteria. So it's really at that point in the plan where we had, again, another major milestone. We took a step back, and we started looking at a value engineering exercise. So what are the existing assets that are out there that we could leverage to make those 2 projects more perform at a higher level, get to that better cost effectiveness rating? And the way we actually did it is we looked at the ridership that we were getting, we knew how much it would cost to provide that service, and we set ourselves a capital budget. So basically said, what will the market support in each one of those corridors? And what we identified, we had similar ridership on both corridors, the CSX and the 275 corridor, and that's why when we talk about costs, you can see they're in the same order of magnitude, because that's the ridership that would support on both corridors. Now, once we had that information, we had the ability to go back, retool those different concepts, and this is where we really came forward with that sort of innovative approach to the 275 corridor, looking at the right-of-way that's already in the interstate today, not requiring any new interstate, using the shoulders, hardening them, widening them, providing a dedicated space for that BRT service, and that had a dramatic impact on our overall capital cost. Same approach with the CSX corridor. We started looking at the existing freight line that's running there, the CSX active freight line, and we identified a rail vehicle technology that can operate on that rail corridor, use that existing track that's out there today. Again, significant savings in cost, getting us closer to that cost of effectiveness criteria. So now we took, really started working towards identifying that draft catalyst that we would take out to the public, and that we did take out to the public starting in January. So comparing the two against each other, again, back to that original purpose of the plan, which is supporting that regional transit vision, we look at the CSX corridor, and what we find is that it serves two major employment areas, USF and downtown Tampa. It also serves 7 different corridors within that vision, and it does serve one active project, which is the downtown Tampa streetcar extension project. Excuse me. Now, in comparison, when you look at the 41 miles in the I-275 corridor, we're actually serving 6 different activity centers and employment centers, serving over 16 of those vision corridors in that ultimate regional vision, and 2 active transit projects, both being the downtown Tampa streetcar as well as the Central Avenue BRT. And again, so we're talking about, is this project regional? There's a distinction between the 2 projects there. Obviously, the I-275 corridor serves all 3 counties, where the CSX is primarily serving Hillsborough County. Both projects are good projects. We've been saying that since January, and honestly, the conversations about both projects have been around for decades. The work that's been done under the feasibility plan, they both have the potential to meet some of those FTA criteria. The only distinction is the cost effectiveness, where the rubber tire on I-275 and the enhancements that we made through the value engineering exercise met that $10 per trip annually or better, where the CSX did not. Now, of course, there are key considerations with both projects. Obviously, when we're looking at something on the interstate, it requires that partnership with the department, with FDOT, and of course, partnership with their modernization plans for the interstate in order for that project to move forward. CSX corridor, the consideration there is that there still needs to be a conversation with CSX to either enter into negotiations to either purchase or lease that property for the transit service. So with those comparisons, we identified the draft catalyst as the I-275 corridor. I'm going to walk you through in a little bit more detail exactly what that draft catalyst was and what we took out to the public in January. You can see here those dedicated shoulders, dedicated lanes from St. Pete to Gateway, West Shore to Tampa, Tampa to USF, and Wesley Chapel as well. You can see a couple of examples of what a typical may look like, or an international example of a similar type of service. We're really talking about those lanes having red lane treatment to it, some sort of physical separation. I think something that we could look at as we move forward into the PD&E, making sure that those dedicated lanes on the interstate are just that. They're there for transit purposes. We did have 2 elements of the draft catalyst that moved away from that dedicated transit lane. The first was the Howard Franklin Bridge. The concept there is that we have a large expanse of water where we're traveling across, and we're not picking up any passengers, we're not dropping any passengers off. So really the idea was to sort of match the capital investment to the ridership need that we saw across the Howard Franklin Bridge, using the plans that FDOT is moving forward to the replacement of the new Howard Franklin Bridge span. And that had a major reduction on overall project costs. Similar conversation, north of Beers, south of the Pasco County line, there's a large area of conservation, same thing. We're not picking anybody up, we're not dropping anybody off, so the concept was to match that capital investment with the ridership demand and actually operate with other traffic in that section of the corridor. All the stations in the draft catalyst were recommended, except for one, to be at street level within the communities that they serve, providing that direct access. And we're really talking about a premium experience along this corridor. You've heard me actually use the word rubber tire, and I think that's why, because I really believe it's much more than bus rapid transit that we're actually discussing here. It's essentially a train-like service with rubber tires is what we're looking to move forward. So we took that draft catalyst out to the public in January. You can see the information provided here on your slide. Many different meetings with stakeholders and the public alike, starting in January, working up right through the September timeframe of this year. And I'm going to talk about some of the survey results that we received on the plan. And then I do want to thank and make note of the endorsements that we received from the City of St. Petersburg, endorsing the catalyst, as well as Ford Pinellas, as well as the Pasco County MPO. So from that survey, we asked the question, Do you think this is a good project? Is this a project that's worth constructing? And we heard overwhelmingly that 77% of our survey respondents said, yes, this is a project that's worth constructing. They believe it's a great start, and they really see it as a way to ease congestion along that heavily trafficked interstate corridor. But we also asked them the question, well, what would you change about this draft catalyst? And we heard a lot of comments that they'd like to see more of it, and they'd like to see more of the dedicated lanes. And that's really a common theme you're going to hear as I move through some of the next couple of slides. So beyond the public outreach, we also had the opportunity to go and talk with several different groups and get either have a discussion, an independent discussion about the concept or a review of the concept. We actually met with the Urban Land Institute of Tampa Bay, the ULI Tampa Bay. We met for the Center of Urban Transportation Research, or CUTR, at USF. We met a couple of different times with the Hillsborough City County Planning Commission, as well as the Institute for Transportation Development and Policy, that's the ITDP. Those are the folks that set those gold, silver, platinum standards for BRT. So, with the public outreach, with that independent review, there are definitely some very prominent themes that, as the Secretary mentioned, are absolutely critical to review in more detail during the PD&E. The first is, how much dedicated lanes will this project be? Is it 100% dedicated, or is it some other mix there within? And how do we get access to those stations? We've got a lot of questions about the stations themselves, realizing that they're actually in the community, not in the interstate. Well, how do you actually make that work? So that's definitely something we need to look at during the PD&E process. From the ITDP and ULI, we heard a lot about making sure that our stations are putting the infrastructure in there needed to encourage economic development, whether it's pedestrian, bicycle access, local transit access, and local connecting in areas of local activity. Absolutely something we can look at during the PD&E process, and focusing on the opportunity for those public-private partnerships, especially at those station areas. From CUTR, we heard the conversation about increasing frequency. We actually preliminary tested the impact of increasing frequency on the corridor. Very positive results. By increasing frequency, we saw to 10 minutes all day. We actually saw a 30 to 40% increase in ridership on the corridor itself. Absolutely something we should evaluate in the next step during the PD&E. We also heard from a number of our business stakeholders and business partners, as well as the Hillsborough Planning Commission, the conversation about how many stations does this project actually need. During the planning and feasibility process, we identified 21 stations along the 41-mile corridor. We've heard a lot of comments, do we really need that many stations? And specifically, we had several workshops with the Hillsborough Planning Commission, and we talked about that piece from USF to downtown Tampa. Conversation was, well, does it actually need to be at Hillsborough Avenue, or can it be at Bird Street, where the Greyhound racetrack is today? Really some very great ideas coming from the Planning Commission, and I do believe that Bird Street does have some some potential to that, so something we should look to in the next phase. West Shore to downtown Tampa, the conversation there was, in between those two key connections, making sure that we have a station at Himes. There's that Midtown development that's occurring there. It's already broken ground. There's construction out there today. Is there an opportunity to work with the folks building the Midtown development to get access to the transit service? So, in summary, those key themes that we heard from the public outreach and how we can refine that draft catalyst moving into the PD&E are how much dedicated lanes do we need on this project? Where are the stations? How do we make sure that there's enough economic development occurring around those stations? And how do we get access to those stations efficiently? And another key aspect of the next step is looking at potential for funding strategies to actually construct the project, as well as is there a need for phasing the project over time? So again, these are all important aspects of those next steps, the PD&E. The PD&E itself is generally between 18 to 24 months. FDOT has mentioned it, the Secretary's mentioned it several times. There is $5 million in this year's work program from FDOT to move this project into PD&E, and that's where you're going to do your environmental compliance, your preliminary engineering, and get that project up to the federal government and get it into the program to apply for federal funding as well. So, If and upon the board today does approve the resolution and we advance the catalyst to the next steps to that PD&E, the things, sort of the critical path that you can expect moving forward, the first step is working out that agreement with the department to get the $5 million to actually conduct the PD&E, get that consultant on board to do the work. That can take between 3 to 6 months, so we're really looking at, starting in December, hopefully wrapping up in springtime to get that consultant on board and get the work started. Now, the first thing out of the gate, that first 4 to 6 months of the PD&E, you're going to really define those design options that I just talked about in great detail for evaluation during the PD&E. You're going to start working on the funding strategies. You're going to start working with FTA to get approval to enter the grant program, and that really constitutes wrapping up the definition of the implementation plan for the Catalyst project. And it's at that point you can move into the real meat of the PD&E, where you're doing the environmental work, where you're doing the preliminary engineering. And at the end of the 2-year process is when you want your local funding commitments in place, as well as consensus from the 3 MPOs for inclusion of that project into their long-range transportation plan. This is the resolution that stands before you today. And I will conclude and answer questions, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, could you just give us a brief, can you read the resolution for us too, so we have that all on the table, because we're going to take questions and then public comment prior to the vote.
Do you want me to read it, or?
Yeah, either you or council, council,
You want to read the whole resolution or just the title? Typically, I would just read
the title.
Resolution number 2018-11, a resolution of the Tampa Bay Area Regional Transit Authority Governing Board accepting and approving Regional Transit Facility Plan.
Okay, thank you. And a general comment I have first too, and thank you for that presentation, Scott. Excellent work you guys have done throughout this entire process. I know we've gone through certain wrinkles and changes, and that's just to be expected and will be expected as we move into PD&E if this project in fact advances. One general observation I want to make, and I would like you to verify this, is that when we're talking transportation long-term, we're not always talking a zero-sum game. So this is not a situation where this project is in lieu of or to the exclusion of rail or light rail in Tampa or the CSX project. Both could go hand in hand within a period of time.
Oh, absolutely.
Is that correct?
Personally, I'd love to see that. I mean, we have so many needs in this region that have not been taken care of from a transit perspective for so long. It's going to take a lot more than one solution to move us forward.
And just to remind the public watching, especially on streaming today, that this was meant to be, as we defined it, a catalyst project which would get things rolling and to spur future projects down the road. So it was not, again, meant to be an end-all to solve all our issues. That's correct. Those are the observations that I have, and again, thank you. I'm going to now open it up to the board for questions, which I assume there will be many, so who would like to start off? Commissioner Kennedy.
Well, I'd rather have others talk.
Okay. Melanie.
This isn't a question, but I would like to share a personal observation and support. I feel like a expert in this area, and it's honestly the reason that I was excited to join the TBARTA board, is that I graduated from law school in 06, about 2 years or a year ahead of the 08-09 crash. And as a result, I started my practice in Orlando, which started my own personal transportation / transit hell. And what I mean by that, and I don't use that word lightly, it also has created some very unsafe situations, and I'll be brief, but I do want to explain them to explain what I believe to be in the importance of passing this plan. Is that shortly after accepting a job in downtown Orlando with my law firm that only had an office there to the exclusion of Tampa at the time, I became engaged to a lovely man here. And as a result of the economy, I was not in a position to leave my job in Orlando. Lawyers were being fired. I was just happy to keep my job and not get a raise. And so as a result, I had to go back and forth between the Tampa and Orlando area for the last 12 or so years of my career. And before I participated in Leadership Tampa, I participated in Leadership Orlando 08-09. And I remember one particular line from my leadership program. And what the partnership saw was that if we did not do something about transportation and transit, that based on their projections, I-4 would come to a halt by X date. And I could never remember X date, it just always stuck with me. And I figured out what I thought to be the date this week, unfortunately, is the reason I missed the policy meeting this past week is I've been involved with the recount, and for the machine recount, I was specifically assigned to Osceola County. It took me 6 hours round trip to get to Osceola every single day. I was literally adding almost a business day. And where I used to worry on my drive about getting a speeding ticket in the 40s, honestly, because around 44, 48, if you've driven that part of I-4, you know that the FHP used to sit there. And now what has happened is instead of the traffic backing up at exit 62 and 68 for Disney, and then 79 on into downtown, which is 45 minutes, John Young to the 80s, in the 40s, where I literally used to worry about getting a speeding ticket, it was taking 45 minutes to go 5 miles. And so what happened was, and I promise I don't have much more, but at one point in my career, I didn't have an extra day a week or frankly every day to start driving. And so what happened was I was choosing between sleeping or I was choosing between going to work or actually providing my clients with the services that I had promised. And there were times that I found myself pulling off the road to sleep at rest areas because I literally couldn't complete the drive, and here's why. I asked my assistant to pull all public transportation options between Tampa and Orlando. And what she found was that if I took the bus, I could either get to work by 4 p.m., and pay for a hotel and spend the night to get there the next day, or that was really my only option. There was only an unsafe option. And so my point is that I was either forced to endure the 6-hour round trip drive, or to hire a private driver, which so few people can afford. Most people can't even afford a car, let alone a private driver. And so what I would say is this, is that I would beg you to pass an imperfect or a perfect, I don't know, I'm not Scott, I don't have the same credentials. What I can tell you is it's a start, and we have done nothing for 50 years. And even if this only gets us a little bit further down the road and we can build on it, I can tell you that hundreds of people in my position would beg to have something, because the bottom line is Brightline is too late. And I don't say that lightly, because the problem that we have is that over this next 6 years, and by the way, I am ecstatic about the idea of Brightline, but by 2024, can you imagine if it's already only 3 hours one way to Osceola without construction? How long is it going to take me to get to my job in Orlando with construction over the next 6 years? How many more hours am I going to spend? Because what happened this week is I didn't see my family. I didn't provide quality client services because I didn't have the extra 6 hours a day, and yet I was forced to spend it. And so I would beg this board to please do something, because I would love, love, love a rubber tire solution. It is something, and if this is what our region and 77% of the people have asked for, and if we have 500,000 new people coming, and that's where I'll end, is the reason we have that problem now in the 40s, is that we allowed our state to build Celebration and Champions Gate and similar communities around the 50s without improving our infrastructure or planning for transit and transportation. And that's exactly when we add these 500,000 people. If you think it's bad today, and that Malfunction Junction is bad today, it is only going to get worse without having this rubber tire solution. And so I do hope this resolution is passed today.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Kathleen Shanahan.
Just for the record, I am the other Hillsborough representative. I was elected by the Hart Board, which does have 4 county commissioners on it. And I have great respect for elected officials. I also have great respect for citizenry that get involved in public policy. And I think this has been one of those issues that 55 plans, much discussion. Scott just went through a lot of the statistics. We heard this morning, I'm sorry Commissioner Kemp was late, she might have been stuck in traffic, from 8 very effective regional representatives covering Clearwater, St. Pete, downtown Tampa, Innovation Wave, and West Shore, as well as USF and PNC. And I think, I'm a person who, for the 15 years I've been involved in public policy in the state of Florida, have learned the opportunity of very vigorous debate, very important to listen to public engagement, and very important to take the first step. And so I think there's several things at play here, which I know the public, because I have always trusted the public, will get. People's personal agendas. This has never been only this project. This is also a regional transit board. Regional is the key word in that. So as we go through this diagnostic, and the next step, if you understand how public policy gets implemented on the transportation side, you have a concept, and I agree with Secretary Gwynn, this is a much further in-depth analysis of this stage than normal projects. We spent a lot of time touching a lot of touch points. And again, I have had the opportunity to work at the statewide level for 3 years, and then as chairman of the State Board of Education in prior volunteer, citizenry, active public policy engagement platforms to understand these processes that when you go to the PD and E phase, which is the next phase, we're going to get a lot smarter, and we're going to get a lot more details, and we're going to get a lot more facts, iterations. But the overall project is what we're voting on today. The concept of a regional project that is an initial phase of approaching at least the beginning of engagement and a real project that people are going to see. We're going to stop talking, and there's actually going to maybe be something that's going to move people effectively and efficiently from St. Pete, Pasco, Clearwater, Tampa, and there are other alternatives that are out there that are also working. The ferry, the CSX line is a great concept. That's a Hillsborough-only concept. And we did hear from the innovation group today, and we did hear from USF students. So I don't think it's right, and I don't ever agree whether you're elected or not elected, and you speak to the point of saying that nobody in Hillsborough supports this plan. That is not a true statement.
I never said that.
Yes, you did. You said that. You said that when you spoke earlier this morning, ma'am. I'm sorry, you did. And I think that it's really important for the public to listen to the words and understand what we're voting on, and understand that this is the first step of a regional transportation plan, where we're trying to maximize the state dollars, your tax dollars and the state dollars, with engagements also from the federal dollars. And so all these things have been done in the process of not saying this is the only project, it's the first project to look at regional maximization. And I respect the process we've gone through. I think it's been a full-bodied process. We've had a lot of public engagement and debate. And I think this is an essential first step. So I seek the board support. As the alternative member for the Hillsborough representative, I wanted you to know I have a voice, and I have a very long career in trying to be an active, thoughtful player in public policy debate. So I appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Next up, the chair recognizes Mayor Kreisman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think all of us probably have experienced a drive similar to that Ms. Griffin described. I can tell you that 10 years ago it used to take an hour and a half to get to downtown Orlando, and not long ago I was trying to go to a Magic game with my son, and if I hadn't taken a detour, I wouldn't have gotten there in less than 3 hours, and I got there in 3 hours because I took a detour and cut 30 minutes off my drive for what used to be an hour and a half drive. I was in Denver several months ago, ironically, on a transit, to attend a transit conference, and I rode their light rail system from the airport to downtown Denver, and it was fantastic, and I love light rail, and I want light rail. But I think an investment in BRT right now paves the way for light rail. It is that step that helps get us to potentially having light rail, because what it'll do is it gives us an opportunity to demonstrate the viability of effective mass transit in our region. It'll help change behaviors in getting people out of their cars, which is what all of us are used to doing, and instead utilizing mass transit to travel from one area to another area. It allows for us to be more nimble and gives us greater flexibility initially as we learn how to best utilize a mass transit system in our region, which when you're starting out, you know, it's an expensive mistake to make if you put in a light rail system in an area that ultimately doesn't prove to have good ridership, whereas with a BRT system, you can test it out for a whole lot less money. You know, Chris Steinacher talked about when Brightline comes in, and I believe it's coming. And when people are going from Orlando to Tampa, I want them to have a way of getting to downtown St. Pete outside of getting in a car or having to rent a car, because they've taken that train to Tampa and now they're stuck, and the only way they can get to downtown St. Pete, if we don't do something, is by renting a car or trying to find some other method that right now just doesn't even exist. And I think Secretary Gwynn really hit it on the head, that the PD&E study, the whole purpose of that is really to bake out these issues that we've identified, whether that's the number of stations, where the stations are, what they look like, how many designated lanes do we have? Do we want to have all designated, or can we go with not having some right now that are? But equally important, how much parking is needed? Or let's ask it a different way, how much isn't needed? You know, and is our money better spent as opposed to on parking, spending it on something else, adding more vehicles so that we can have shorter turnarounds and greater frequency? Because the one thing that I learned at that summit that I went to in Denver is it's all about frequency, it's about reliability, and it's about the cost to the rider. And if you achieve all three of those things, you're going to have good ridership numbers. So to me, this is a start, because we have been talking about transit. We were talking about it when I first got on city council back in 2000. We've been talking about transit, we've been debating about transit, but nothing has changed. We have no forward movement. This is an opportunity for forward movement. It may not be perfect, but you got to start somewhere. So I encourage the board to support taking this next step.
Thank you, Mayor. The chair recognizes Commissioner Starkey.
Do I press this?
You're on.
Okay. Well, I echo what my fellow board members have said, and I will tell you a little personal story. When our train money was vetoed, I lost my son. He said, I'm out of here, and he left Tampa Bay, and he went to school at MIT and got his master's in real estate, sold his car before he went to Boston, and moved to New York, and lived there for many years without a car. He bought one now because that's how he gets his golf clubs around. I am a fan of light rail. Whenever I travel, and I like to travel a lot, I always look for light rail options and water ferry options and BRT options. So I've ridden them all. I do believe that we will have light rail here one day, but I don't think that day is here yet. That's a longer process, a longer discussion, and we must start somewhere. I represent a county where 55% of the population is heading south to work. And frankly, many in northern Hillsborough County are heading north to go east and west to move south. So we have some real regional transit problems, and this is the first step in solving those. And it looks like it's going to be affordable. I still have a little concern about that area in North Hillsborough County, and I do want to suggest that while we're going through the PD&E, we talk with SwiftMud. I used to sit on the SwiftMud board. They sell land all the time, and it's possible we could mitigate. We could buy some land somewhere else and mitigate for, you know, a 20-foot or 30-foot swath along the side there, and maybe get that dedicated lane that I think we're going to need. So please consider that in your discussions. I'm happy to help move that discussion forward. I also I enjoyed your conversation about the ULI thoughts, because I do believe transit-oriented development is really going to be part of the solution for paying for this, and anchoring up, and those those developments will be the anchors for other kinds of transit as well. And I'm excited that I believe we're going to move forward today. I have conversed with a few of the other commissioners in Hillsborough, and they seem that they are supportive of this. So I want to remind us all that we don't represent ourselves, we represent our boards. And again, it's a first step, and I look forward to seeing what the report and your work brings back to us. Thank you.
Thank you. We had some down here, Commissioner Seal. We should have you right now. Yeah, I got you.
Okay. Well, Commissioner Starkey, I could tell my son's story as well. And I'm pleased that he did return back to this area, and one of the first things that they have commented on as well, nothing has changed. And that's very discouraging when you finally have a millennial who moves back and feels like no progress has been made. I can also go back, and I wish I brought it today, to a 1983 article where my father, who was vice mayor of Clearwater, was trying to get mass transit moving forward in the Pinellas area. And after, I can't count how many studies, and I can't count the number of hours that I've been engaged and involved with trying to move forward with some transit plans. I just hope that we not only move forward with the study, but then we actually do something, because it is way overdue for this region to have something that moves people in an efficient way, in a cost-effective way. I think Mayor Kreisman made a good point that this is a way to test how we move people from cars into transit, and that is much more flexible, and we can learn from this entire opportunity. So the other part of this that we keep not talking about is, we talked about earlier from the policy committee, is that there are emerging technologies. Those emerging technologies may come into play as we continue through this PD&E study. So I think it's very important that we embrace this and that we actually do something. And I thank you all for listening to my comments.
Thank you, Karen. Cliff?
Thank you, Chair. My comments are related to a couple of things, and one of them is a question for you, Scott, if you don't mind. Number one, I strongly support the recommendations and the feasibility analysis that you've done, and agree with the chairman. It's an excellent report from cover to cover, a lot to read, a lot to absorb. One of the things that I wanted to ask you, in addition to recommending to the board that we keep focusing on the ultimate goal being Brooksville, I like that opening statement. I'd like to get there eventually. But as it relates to parking in particular, I noticed in the study, y'all made some great gains in saving money and making it feasible as you looked at different ways you move people between points of interest. Fixed rail, fixed corridors, or working with DOT. And where you got the biggest lift, from my perspective, is when you cooperated our dollars with DOT and we started using the right-of-way and some of their transportation dollars to make it work.
Correct.
The significant savings were in between destinations. In any of those alternatives, were parking considerations a driver or significantly different? I mean, if you go fixed rail from one community to another, does it substantially reduce the parking considerations versus rubber tire in interstate corridors or fixed corridors? I mean, was that a driver at all in the feasibility analysis?
We actually applied the same methodology to all alternatives. And at this stage of the game, unfortunately, we don't know what we don't know. And a big part of that is, when we're talking about the parking side, is conservatively assuming that there's enough parking for all the folks that we're forecasting to use the service. Now, that is just sort of an industry best practice. It's also, I will admit, a placeholder. Because as we go through the PD&E, those costs, and we get those details in, those costs are going to change. So to have sort of a conservative approach at our cost now at the planning level is very critical because there are so many unknowns. So we applied the same methodology for either whether it was rail or whether it was BRT. It was not dependent on the mode itself. Same assumptions for the CSX corridor that we made for the BRT corridor. And again, it's just making sure that there's enough parking to serve the ridership that we're seeing along the corridor as a first step. Now, when we get into the details, we start taking stations away, that takes parking away. And we get a better understanding of actually where those stations are. Are there opportunities to partner with facilities that are already out there today that maybe you could share parking lots and spaces, and especially in the urban core, do we need parking at all? So those are big conversations as we're moving forward. I'm not sure if I addressed your question.
My clarification was a little different, and I understand your, first of all, I'm looking forward to getting into PD&E and getting more detailed information on the subject. My question was there a significant difference in the feasibility considerations with the methodologies that you used if you were fixed rail versus cooperatively working with DOT and 75 corridor as far as the parking? Was one dramatically lower with the fixed rail concept versus a BRT? I mean, was there significant changes from one analysis to the other than the reduced cost for moving people between the points?
No, because like I said, the parking is a derivative specifically of ridership. So while we, through the partnership with FDOT, and we could see those cost savings and flex highway dollars to the benefit of transit to get people between those points, that had no impact on the ridership itself. It just helped us with that cost, making the overall project more cost effective. So parking, like I mentioned, is specifically derived based on the ridership itself, and it really didn't have an impact either by mode or by corridor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cliff. Chair recognizes Commissioner Kemp.
I have a few questions of Secretary Gwynn. Most of this system that you're talking about, express buses on the highway, you keep calling it BRT, as if you have lanes. So when we talk about lane construction moving forward, when, I know you'll start the bridge fairly soon, when do you expect the bridge to be completed?
Current plan would call for the bridge to be complete roughly 2024.
2024. So when do you expect the West Shore interchange to be completed?
Actually, that's something that we're going to bring up later in new business to talk about. I don't have a date right now, and that's something we're hoping to change.
So but that could be, at this point, something like 2028, any of this other stuff moving forward, 2028, 2030. So, I mean, I still think it was a misrepresentation to the public to ever allude to the fact that this would be available in 5 years, whereas the CSX tracks are available today. And I don't care about mode. It doesn't matter to me. I think it would be ridiculous to put rail on the highway. That's the problem. You don't want to put this kind of on an elevated highway. You don't want to do that. That would be a terrible investment to make. Mode isn't important. I do not care about I do find so many misrepresentations in your presentation, and I do think it's much more accurate, instead of calling it a regional transit feasibility plan at this point from what's been presented, to call it a regional parking garage plan, because that's what it is. I do object to you constantly saying that you looked at the CSX from downtown to USF when you did not. You looked at it from downtown to Fowler, Nebraska, and I think you should be clear about that instead of constantly misrepresenting that. And also the fact that during this whole 2 years of this $1 million study, $1.5 million study, that you couldn't ever find from Orlando what Sunrail costs per mile. But all of that, it doesn't matter, because I feel like now Hillsborough County can move forward. The fact that it's been called not regional rail, I just think is ludicrous. I don't know what makes it not regional rail compared to highways, but I expect that we'll be able to move forward in Hillsborough County on projects. I think if there's Also, the fact that you put up there, the ULI, Cutter, the Planning Commission, I asked for the backup on any of this, and here's what I got. I got these 5 pages. You know, one of them is a list of meetings. That's a whole backup I got for all those slides about all this support that was, and research and whatever. I mean, it's just like everything else to do with this. It's surface and misrepresenting, you know, to the public what this actually is. I know that there is lots of, you know, transit support. I am a huge transit supporter. I have 2 millennials that moved away. My daughter said she will never, and she won't, move back. She lived in New York and now Toronto. She never will buy a car. My son lives out west. You know, I've ridden the transit in Denver. I spent 10 days riding the transit in Toronto, known for some of the best transit in the world. I want us to have transit that actually moves people. And if other people want to commit to parking garages instead as an investment, then I think, you know, that's fine. I do not believe that I said nobody in Hillsborough County supported this, but if I did, I misspoke. I'll say this. I do not believe that this will move forward in Hillsborough County, which is what I think I said. We heard at the beginning that there was, you know, no support from the MPO, HART, the other organizations listed there. I don't believe that this will be embraced by Hillsborough County, and I don't think it should be. I think if the state wants to build these parking garages and wants to do this inter-county, they should definitely be responsible for funding the system totally and paying for the operation cost of it like they do in Miami and Orlando if they want to do this. I think it would be a bad transit investment and would not be in support in Hillsborough County of doing this, obviously. And I don't think the support will be there in Hillsborough County for in any way making a local contribution to this. It's, you know, I keep hearing public partnerships. To me, it just looks to me like a big giveaway to automated vehicle interests for their private vehicle cars to build these big parking garages. And I think that's fairly clear that that's what this whole thing is. And it's not to do with transit and moving groups of people. And, you know, the corporate interests involved in this. From the start, I think we have huge conflicts of interest on the Tampa Bay Partnership in terms of their interests and who they are lobbying and getting money for moving forward. And it doesn't serve people. It's not a transit plan that serves people. I think it serves big interests, and I'll just, you know, I fully expect that we will go forward with our PD&E. I fully expect you'll probably be the principal on going forward to do this research as you've done for the 2015, you know, transit bus plan, express bus plan, which I thought was good and what we should be doing, actually, and what we are doing, and to move people in the region. And also the 2012 CSX, which, you know, you haven't brought those up to the public or made those available, but those are my comments about this. I really do want to see transit, and I want to see it everywhere, but this is not a transit plan. So,
thank you, Melanie.
Secretary Gwen, if I remember correctly, at our February 23rd, 2018 meeting, you outlined the 3 to 5 hurdles that were involved with CSX, and I think suggested that if anyone, including Commissioner Kemp, could help solve those in terms of getting federal funding, et cetera, that DOT would be supportive of light rail. Can you remind us of that, and has anything changed on those points that were needed to move forward with the CSX project?
No, I don't specifically remember off what the 5 were, but we certainly are willing to work with a local agency on rail if we can meet the requirements, which typically is we have to follow the federal process. DOT won't match local funds unless we do go through the federal process, even if we don't get the federal money, because if you don't get the federal money and then you go back later for an expansion, you can use that first part investment as your investment and get more federal money. So Hillsborough County, Pinellas County, anybody who came up with a plan to do a rail project, we could certainly do that. I think through TBARTA, we know that I don't believe TBARTA can propose a rail project without the legislature's approval, so that's an additional hurdle in there. But for instance, Hillsborough County, if Hillsborough County wanted to take the lead on a rail project, we could certainly help to support that, and we've done that around the state. One thing that's a little bit different, you know, the CSX tracks, one thing to remember is typically CSX, when they don't want to sell you their tracks and then say, bye, we're getting out of here, all yours. What they say is, okay, we want you to use it, but at night we'll probably want to use it for freight. And by the way, we need you to do a number of improvements in the signaling and the safe zones around some of the intersections. And it basically, you're responsible for upgrading it and letting them still use it. When you let them still use it for freight, you cannot put light rail in that corridor. It's not going to be light rail. It's going to be something with a heavier diesel unit probably that would be more like commuter rail. And so if there was a possibility that, I mean, the Brooksville line, you know, the straight up and down line is not as much used as the A line or the S line, which one it is over in Orlando. So maybe they would be open to something different. But there's a lot of things that have to be worked out on that, but FDOT will be there if all the other folks come in with their part.
Other questions? Okay, thank you, Scott, for that presentation. Oh, Janet. Oh, I'm sorry, your light wasn't flashing.
Oh, you turned it on?
No, I let him, that goes off when she recognizes another person.
Oh, you skipped over me.
Oh, no.
All right, then, I see how it is.
You're on.
Okay, so I will be extremely brief. I just wanted to ask us all to really thank from the bottom of our hearts the hard work that FDOT and Scott and all the folks, the planners, everybody at PSTA have worked so hard for so long to bring us where we are today. Like several other people here, I moved to Florida in 1972 from New York City. Great transportation, public transportation there. Was quite a culture shock when I arrived. But I did think it was paradise, and so I stayed. And from that day until now, I've clearly been very closely watching what's gone on in transportation. And I do believe that for the first time in 50 years, we are further ahead today than we have ever been, both with the cooperation of our state partners as well as our federal partners. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. We have come a very long way. And we have miles to go, but I totally embrace this program that we're working on today. Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions for Scott? Thank you, Scott, for that great presentation. I am now going to open this up to public comment before we vote on the resolution. Chair recognizes Rick Homans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Obviously, we'll be brief this morning, but want to respond first off to the Commissioner Kemp's accusation and charge that there is some conflict of interest that the partnership has and stands to gain, I assume, in some way from this project. Let me be absolutely clear about our interest in this project. The mission of the partnership is to create a unified, competitive, and prosperous region. A region needs to be connected in order to be competitive and prosperous. Employers needs to be connected to employees. Employees need to be connected to jobs. The events that occur in our region, the students that have to travel, the activity centers that we are creating, the elderly that need to move around. We need to have regional connectivity. The project that you are considering today is one project. Its intention is to connect the region and to be a feeder into and out of the local systems. The local systems are the core, the foundation of our regional transit infrastructure. They handle bus, BRT, rail, rideshare, bikes, scooters. They'll handle Brightline, which as of this morning has been renamed to be Virgin Trains USA with their new partnership. This project, our aspiration for it as it enters the PD&E phase is very high. We have said from the beginning this needs to achieve the gold standard of the ITDP. It needs platform-level boarding. It needs off-board ticketing. It needs 41 miles of dedicated lanes. It needs frequency of service. And most importantly, it needs community-based stations that are intermodal stations that connect all the facets of our transportation system. We would encourage you to move this project into PD&E so that we can further define and improve the plan to be the best it can possibly be and turn it from a plan into a project, and we can implement a regional system that connects with our county-based systems. And thank you all for your dedication to this effort, and also to Scott Pringle and his team for their work. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Rick. Anyone else wishing to make public comment? Okay, none being heard, I will close public comment. It is now time for me to accept a motion to approve this resolution.
So moved.
Who made the first motion and the second for the record? Kathleen?
We all made it.
Yeah.
Kathleen, okay, gotcha. All right, council, do we have the motion and the second recorded?
I think as long as Stu has
Sue, you. Okay. Been a motion, a second, any further discussion? All right, Sue, will you please call the roll?
Chair Jim Holton.
Yes.
Melanie Griffin.
Absolutely.
Cliff Manuel.
Yes.
Mike Miller.
yes.
Commissioner Pat Kemp.
No.
Commissioner Betsy Bernat. Commissioner Catherine Starkey.
Absolutely, yes.
Commissioner Karen Seal. Kathleen Shanahan.
Yes.
Commissioner Janet Long.
Yes.
Mayor Rick Kreisman.
Yes.
You have 9 yes votes, 1 no, the motion carries.
Thank you. Motion carries. Congratulations, board, for that. Okay, moving on to additional business. Finance Committee, there was no November meeting. Does the Finance Committee have anything to report?
Not today, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
The Legislative Subcommittee report, any activity there?
None today, but next time we will.
Okay, and there was no Citizens Advisory Committee meeting, so there's no report for that, I suggest. Transit Management Committee reports, anything there?
No meeting was held, so no report.
Okay. Old and new business, Chair wants to recognize Secretary Gwynn to give us an update on what's going on with the West Shore interchange. This issue was brought up before, and of course this is one of the most salient issues that will impact the project we just voted on. So I'd like to hear what's going on there and help you in any way to facilitate that moving through the state DOT process.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Kemp mentioned the West Shore interchange, and that's the main thing I wanted to talk about today. I would say, and Commissioner Kemp, I know, and I've spoken to you a number of times, we've had some discussions about a number of things, but I would hope that and I think you will, now that we're going to go forward with this PD&E, be an active participant and to keep an open mind. I think it may come with a different conclusion than you may think it's going to come out to. The PD&E will go into a lot more detail. Some of you may remember several years ago, the West Shore interchange, which we call segments 4 and 5 of the SEIS that we're currently completing, had about $500 million of funding that was being put into the work program to allow that project to proceed shortly after, or maybe even concurrently with the Howard Franklin Bridge. When, for a variety of reasons, including some perhaps poor marketing messages from FDOT on some of our projects, and also just a lot of input from the community, from elected officials, from boards, that money was taken out of the work program and ultimately was sent over to Orlando to be put towards the I-4 Beyond the Ultimate project. And that happened shortly before I came into my current position, when I went to Tallahassee to try to see if I could get that money back, or if at least know why it was taken away. More or less what we heard was that, you know what, it doesn't sound like the region's ready for it yet. You got some things to work out with the community. You need to get a regional consensus on this. But all we're seeing up here in Tallahassee is articles in the Times. We're seeing a lot of citizen complaints. We're getting stuff from the governor's office that they're getting, and it just said they pretty much just said, you know what, Orlando said we're ready for it, and they won on that battle. We are currently getting ready to move into the final stages of the supplemental environmental impact statement. That's what we agreed to do with the community to reassess the downtown interchange, which is I-4 and 275, all the way down to the Howard Franklin Bridge, which includes the West Shore area, and out to connect to the Veterans Expressway and Courtney Campbell Causeway. That report will be going to a public hearing within the next 6 months, at which time we hope to get approval from the Federal Highway Administration to move forward with projects. There's really two components of this SEIS. Even though we're studying them together, they have completely different context right now. If you take what we call segments 4 and 5, which is everything basically west or south of the Hillsborough River, taking it back over to the Howard Franklin and tying all that in, has pretty much very little opposition for the most part. When we built out I-275 a few years ago, we set everything on the outside of 275 for the final part of the right-of-way. We don't have to go into those communities anymore. All the improvements from West Shore up towards the river are going to be done in the median, and those would include express lanes as well as a 44-foot transit corridor that's provided in there that could be used for BRT, rail, whatever in the future. And then we had segment 6, which is the downtown interchanges. Once you get across the river and you get into Tampa Heights, you get into Seminole Heights, you get into Ybor City. That is still got a lot of work for us to do. We've worked very hard with those communities. I think we've made a lot of progress, but we still have things still left to go to get that resolved. What we're working with FHWA and our central offices is to try to look for some way to bring funding back into the work program for segments 4 and 5. Because if you look at what we're doing, the Veterans Expressway, the Turnpike has expanded the capacity there. We know that if you go to Pasco County and no further north, there's a lot of development up there that's going to eventually be using that corridor to come down. Where do they go? They come right into the West Shore area. Courtney Campbell, of course, comes across. 2 of the 3 bridges from Pinellas County come right into that area. Howard Franklin will also have additional capacity. So this is going to become the knot if we don't find a way to loosen that knot up and accept all this additional traffic. So what I've been doing is going around to various boards and agencies. We've already gotten initial support from the MPOs in Pinellas and Pasco County, as well as the county commissions. We've gotten support from a number of business community organizations, chambers of commerce, partnerships, others. We're working with Hillsborough County to bring before the MPO and the county commission to see if they will provide their support for us as well. The goal being is to take all this. Mayor will also be looking to St. Pete and Tampa for support and the transit agencies. We want to bring all this together. You know, what I envision is going up to, after we get the new governor in office and we perhaps have a new secretary, but we have an opportunity for some things to change. I want to bring them this book of all the people that we have in the region now and organizations that say, this is our #1 regional priority. It may not be in our individual cities or counties, it may be in another county, but we support this as the #1 regional priority because that's how strategic intermodal system funding is distributed. And that's the big pot of money that's really the only thing that could allow us to get over $1 billion to build this project. We won't get enough in MPO money and other things. We need that SIS money. So what I mentioned to the chairman I'd like to do is just to ask for the board to consider providing support in naming segments 4 and 5 of the Tampa Bay Next program as the #1 SIS priority, and so that I can put that in my group of other letters and bring that with me when I go to make a pitch for it.
Thank you, Secretary. Any questions for the Secretary along those lines?
I'd like to move his proposal forward for our board to take a position.
I agree with that. I think the appropriate procedure is to refer to the policy committee for a resolution coming for the next meeting, probably.
Do we have time, Mr. Secretary?
I think we do. We have, I don't know if you have another meeting. We have it in 2 weeks, I think. So, yeah, we don't.
It should come in a form of resolution.
So we can draft a strong resolution. I would urge the policy committee to support this because it's vital to the project that we just moved to advance today. It's central to that. And I think transportation in the entire region.
Yeah. Thank you.
Happy to do so. Okay, any other new business? None being heard, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Adjourn.
Excellent job, Mr. Chair.
Good job.
Very smooth. Got your notes for next time. I'll have you. I'll have you over there.
Oh, no.
I don't like sitting that close to the center.
I was looking all over for.
All the courses in great shape.